Okay, welcome to the Practice Experts interviews. If you're not familiar with these, we interview uh, generally healthcare practitioners around the industry to understand what they're doing in their careers, how they're benefiting patients and sometimes often other practitioners in the work that they do. I'm delighted today to talk with Barbara Razor. She's a holistic healthcare practitioner with a specialty focus on in intuitive care for patients, or the discipline of intuition to get to the root of patient issues, and using her skills in that discipline to arrive at a higher level of healthcare. And so, welcome, Barbara. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Richard. I mean, I'm excited to be here too. And, it's exciting to be in this group and to bring a specialized skill set to this group that is really outside of the box for most people. But once you understand it, then what happens is you go, oh, I can maybe use that. This person needs that. And I work with a lot of MDs, I work with a lot of psychotherapists. Um, it, I helps give that extra support or that in depth. Where is this problem really stemming from? And my specialty is more the emotional patterns that a person's in versus the psychology of somebody. And I have really good tools that people can use. I call it my toolbox. And with my clients, I'm always asking them to, did you go in your, did you go into your toolbox? Did you use your tool? Because I don't want a codependency. I don't want to always give you the answers. I want to teach you how to get those answers because that's important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great segue into kind of the first question I'm going to ask you. I suspect we're all familiar with intuition and use it to a greater extent or lesser extent. But we may not be familiar. You refer to yourself as an intuitive coach or an intuitive health coach. Help give us some framework for that, because you're using intuitive as a noun, as opposed. And so, what is an intuitive? And perhaps give us a little background on how you got into it, what led you here.
My intuition is in the area of emotions. As a child, I was one of five, middle child. Middle child tends to be that bridge that everybody crosses over, and you never quite feel like you're a part of anything, but you're in everything. And I found that I was so sensitive to everybody's emotions, I would actually act out what they were suppressing.
Hmm.
And I was just as dumbfounded as they were. They go, why are you doing this? I'm like, I don't know. And at that time, I really didn't understand what was happening. I just knew I was overly sensitive, overly emotional, and I didn't have my own identity because I was so empathic that I was taking everybody else's stuff on. So then I switched gears here and I went into science and radiology technology, and
Mhm.
I abandoned my emotions. I became very linear. I became very scientific because I love science too. And I abandoned how I thought I was feeling, only for it to catch up with me later. And it caused me to have some major problems with my body. And I had to go back into it and find out what I hadn't processed. And that's where my journey began.
That's fascinating. So the go a little deeper, if you would, on the discipline of being an intuitive. Are there schools, or is there training, or how do you once you recognize what you are, and the skill set that you've got, and or talent, or whatever you want to call it, how do you go about developing it?
Their intuition is very subjective. This is why it's very hard to actually do any testing with or teach it, because each of us will intuit through one of the major five senses. You will either be more of a visual intuitive, you'll see things that aren't really there, you'll hear things of your auditory. I'm very kinesthetic. And so I would feel when a person was tight, my body became their body. So when I intuit, I'm not really reading you. I'm in tune with you, and I'm sharing how that attunement affects me. So if you don't breathe, I don't breathe. If your jaws get tight, my jaws get tight. So I language the effect your body is giving me. And that would be through what we call the Gestalt brain. The Gestalt brain is usually the right hemisphere, but it can be switched. And it connects to all the sensations or the information is coming through the body, temperature, pressure. So if you are very empathic through the Gestalt brain and somebody's angry and they're pushing that anger at you, you're going to feel assaulted and you're going to back up. And then the person who's doing it, if they're not aware they're doing it, they're going to really be not sure why you're backing up and what's happening. They're not going to understand the interaction. Some people are of the other hemisphere, the logical hemisphere. And when you switch over to the left hemisphere, usually the left, it's logical, then what happens is you get insights from guides, God, universe, higher self, whatever you want to label that. And this is where a lot of scientists go, oh, I got to find that sweet spot where I can get an insight. So all that information from the logical brain is stuff outside of you, and it's more in the program or presentation of visual auditory. We use our whole brains at all times, but we don't pay attention to the whole brain.
Mhm.
We go back and forth sometimes, or we have a dominant hemisphere that we want to stay in. So if most people are trained, most men, I'll say men, are trained to be more logical and um, they're more, what do I see? What do I hear? And you're talking to a feminine person, whether it's male or female, and they're very emotional. And those two hemispheres don't talk at all the same way. The Gestalt brain will talk in the summation of what is being experienced. It's like a ball. It's, I feel like. So it uses a lot of subjective presentation. And you're making me feel would be something a person is trying to convey how they're feeling, but how that information is coming from the person to them. And
Well,
so,
that's really fascinating. You're calling to mind a number of things. One of the first things came to mind is I've done a lot of massage therapy as a receiver, not as a giver, and some of the best massage therapists, and this I guess it's more of a physical thing, but they could know what's going on in my body almost before they touched it, an
yes.
area, and they tend to be a lot more effective. It's like, okay, how did you know that? And they wouldn't necessarily be able to describe it. They just said I felt it, and the other thing that you said that rang a bell with me is, if you listen to a lot of scientists like Einstein, or I mean, you could name them all. We think of science as a logical process, but when scientific discoveries happen, they often describe it as as an intuitive thing, that just the light bulb went off, or they woke up, or they had a dream, and all of a sudden, boom, they discovered the light bulb, or they discovered, uh, yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, that combination of left brain, right brains, science and logic and intuition is clearly the work of both sides of our brains, trying to figure out our world.
And we don't use it. We don't understand what the value of the Gestalt brain is giving us versus what the logical brain is giving us, which is all that inspiration. Most people want to go to a psychic who tends to give, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, tends to give what the guides are saying. well, your guide is saying this and this and this. But if you don't check in with the person to see if their subconscious gestalt brain is going to support that, then no matter how much you predict or tell them this is possible, their own internal patterns are going to keep them from doing it.
Hmm.
And this is why you need to understand both hemispheres, because one part of you is all about what happened with mom, dad, home, and love. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're working with somebody and they're real even keel until they get stressed, and then they just blow up. They just become somebody you don't really recognize. I have had that with clients who come to me and they go, I don't know why I do that. And what their body tells me through the intuitive process, the sense I get is that they grew up in that. That's mom, dad, home, and love pattern. And when we are stressed, we tend to go back to those patterns. And so for that particular person, he was watching how when his dad's voice would raise or when his mom's voice would raise, how it would affect everybody. And he was able to see it got their attention. So he recorded that in his body repertoire to say, this is a pattern I'm going to use when I'm stressed.
Hmm.
And so when we are stressed, our body looks for those patterns, go, do this, do this. And if you don't recognize where it's coming from and the age that it's coming from, you really can't do anything with it. It just keeps happening to you, sort of. It's happening because of you, but it's really happening also to you from your history.
Yeah, that's great. So you're segueing beautifully into the question I have. So what's the value of going to an intuitive? How do I, what's the handle by which I say I need an intuitive, or intuitive is going to help me with these things? What, help us understand that? How do people find you and and
How have they found me? That's still a mystery. I don't take out ads. I don't. It's all been word of mouth. And I remember I contacted Dr. Norm Shealy when I first started, and I said, "Hey, I think I'm one of those people you like." And he called me and he had me do a session with him. And after he was done, he goes, "You're good. You're fast. Click." I'm like, "Okay." I didn't know what that meant. But then he started using my skill set. And then I started teaching at Hollis University Graduate Seminary my skills that I was bringing to the table. And those were more the emotional patterns. And I'll give you an example of a story that is actually in a book. Um, a client of mine, she came to me and her dad came, and after she was done, she goes, "Dad, you got to work with Barb." And he goes, "No." And I looked at him, and the story that came to me, now these are metaphors as far as I'm concerned. The metaphor that came to me is, oh no, I've stabbed him in the back several times. In fact, there's still a knife back here. And he goes, oh, I have pain there. Nobody can get rid of it. And I said, well, turn around and take the knife out. I said, I'm really sorry I did this, but apparently I did. And I'm thinking in my brain, wow, is this crazy or what?
you were
So
actually saying that verbally to
I
him?
was saying that verbally to him, but in
Yeah.
my own brain, I was going, whoa, this is out there. But I hadn't turned around, and I found the hilt, the energy of the hilt of the knife, and I pulled it out, and all of a sudden the pain went away and it never came back.
Hmm.
Never. Nobody had up to that point been able to take it away. So it was a pattern locked in the body. And when these patterns get locked in the body, they affect that, for him, his shoulder. Another one is where, and I think I shared this with you, was my very first session with a person where I was working out as a massage therapist, because I went from x-ray tech to massage therapy. And I was working on her elbow, and I kept getting blood and a tricycle. And I just said, what does blood and a tricycle have to do with this elbow? And she goes, oh my gosh. And she gave me the story of how when she was younger, she took her trike out. When she wasn't allowed to, she banged her elbow really hard. and had blood on it. And then she hid it from her parents. But she also kept that story stuck in that elbow. And she had had tennis elbow for years until we talked about it and released it. It was amazing. Then she never had it again. So it taught me that these patterns are located in different aspects of the physical body, and they do interrupt how the organ works or what kind of pain you have. And there is always, with all illnesses, an emotional component. So when you start releasing them, you start changing your chemistry,
Hmm.
and it's amazing.
So go back, if you would, to teaching and in these courses. That implies to me that there's some kind of curriculum, or there's some techniques or methodologies or modalities. So how do you package up and teach something like being an intuitive, or is it
Yeah, it is possible. And first of all, you have to identify which hemisphere you tend to gravitate towards too. And so if you close your eyes and you think about something, are you seeing it? Are you listening to it? Do you feel it? And one of those major aspects will be probably more prominent. And that will be more than likely your go to hemisphere then, especially when you're under stress. When you're stressful, you go to the dominant hemisphere that gives you the most information that's valid to you, not to somebody else, but to you, what helps you feel safe. So I have a tool and it's on YouTube. It's called the awareness tool. And you actually, what you do is you bring a focus out here, and you focus out here and you imagine you're jumping onto whatever that focus is. So I like to use a dot. And as soon as you do, you'll feel or experience your body feeling detached. You ever walk around, you ever see somebody and you know that you're talking to them and they're someplace else?
mm-hmm. Often, yeah.
That's because their awareness is outside of themselves.
Oh, I thought I was just boring.
No, well, that could be too. But usually it's because they're out here someplace. And so when they're out here, you look and go, where are you? And a lot of times they go, oh, I'm out here. Can you come back in? And so when they come back in, if what you are saying is hitting them, is triggering them, then they tend to go out and avoid it. That's their avoidance tool. But what I do is I bring it in and I have them bring into the right hemisphere until they can feel their body. So if you imagine, for you, Richard, if you imagine a dot and you brought it into your right hemisphere, you would notice your breathing is tight. It's not very fluid because you're intent on listening and getting the information. So breathe for a second for me and just think of something positive, but be in the right hemisphere and everything just let loose. Did you experience that?
Um,
Softer.
yeah, I, 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 I think so. I mean, I've done a lot of brain study myself on the differences between the hemispheres, and I've done the kind of things that you're talking about, purposely trying to live in the left hemisphere is often described as a serial processor that takes you through. Oh, I've got a I've got a I'm out of bananas. I need to get them to the store, so I have to go through the steps to get it. Whereas, and it's all about tends to be about us. Right hemisphere tends to be about the whole us within the context of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just been fascinating research on that. So I'm definitely resonating with what you're talking about.
Right. So
Um,
if you were to take that and walk out of your right hemisphere into your left, when you're totally dominant and paying attention only to the logical, and I'm using left and right, but again, these can be switched. When you're in the logical hemisphere, you can't feel your body. You don't know what the emotions are that's coming from you. You don't understand what is being conveyed that other people are paying attention to. So if you have somebody who's angry and they're talking like this and they have a lot of anger pushing at you, you can sense it and it distracts what the person is trying to say.
Hmm.
I just demonstrated that with my body. Well, how did you interact with that?
Yeah, exactly. So in your work, have you found that there are different types of intuitives, and how does that kind of play out in how they use those skills? And again, everybody's got intuition, but we're talking specifically about a discipline called being an intuitive.
Intuitive,
So,
yeah.
right.
Right.
So what have you seen how there are maybe different types of intuitives and how they use those skills?
There, we all have something that is really specific to us. Mine was emotional, just growing up emotional. And I learned all the repertoires of all the emotions and what they do as a child. If I had been around maybe parents who were doctors, I might be more inclined to be about the body and sense the structure of the body, the disease patterns of the body. There are people who are more about the mentalness of a person, how they think. And so we all have different areas in which we can cross over just like a general practitioner can, like just a general MD. But when you find somebody who needs more help, more in depth, then you find that type of intuitive who can specialize and get deeper into whatever area that it is. So it could be health, it could be finances. There are people who are very good intuitive in the financial aspect of it.
Hmm.
One of my best friends is she can do your books, and then she'll tell you through your books and through her intuition what your emotional issues around money are. It's amazing how accurate she is.
Hmm.
And so we just have different areas in which we take our specialty and we have that intuitive sense.
Do you find that the intuition work you do, you've mentioned emotions a lot. Does it typically always lead back to emotional
It
things?
it's both. It is your mindset, your belief system, which are in the logical brain, and it's your emotional set, which is in the Gestalt brain. The emotions again are a summation, cumulate, combining of all your history, and usually it'll get stuck at an event. So when you're looking at somebody and all of a sudden they look 7 years old, and you can tell they're stuck at a certain age, that's where the issue is. And you ask them, how old do you feel? And they're like, oh, about three. Yeah, you are three right now. And you're letting the 3 year old drive the car. What's wrong with that? But we do. We go back to when we first have an incident or an experience in which we went through it and left a mark, and we came out with a viable, safe, or life, um, a result that gave us more life somehow. It might not be the safest, but we lived through it. And so those patterns then become our repertoire, and that certain age person will then show up. It's just amazing how,
Hmm.
if you start looking at people when they're switching hemispheres and what happens to their physical body, it's amazing.
Well, you've mentioned patterns a number of times, and it's often said that humans are actually, our brains are just pattern recognition machines.
Yeah.
We recognize patterns. So what what are your observations about emotional patterns in what you've observed? You've mentioned some of them, but so break down some of those patterns for me. I'm thinking about, you've talked about a lot about emotion, but I'm thinking about laying on a massage table and having a massage therapist kind of know where the pain is in my back or tension in my arm or whatever like that. I wouldn't necessarily equate that to an emotional thing. It's maybe an old injury, but that person was able to kind of zero in on the energy that was in that area. Is
Right.
that one of those patterns, or
Yes. If you, so you were touching your neck earlier, and you probably go to the same spot every single time. if you put your hand on there and you switch to the Gestalt brain and you use your left brain to ask the right brain, what is the emotion or story stuck here? And you just breathe and you allow the feelings to come up or the insight to come up, then you could probably get to what's stuck there. And at minimum, get rid of the emotional charge that's stuck there. The body, I think of it, or how it's been presented to me intuitively. Now again, intuition is subjective, and intuition is using the framework that relates either to the intuitive or the person they're working with, so that it makes sense. So it might not be scientifically correct, but it's think of them as metaphors. So every time you have an emotion stuck in an area of your body, you're leaving a negative charge, and that negative charge gets in the way of energy flowing and the chemistry may be binding. If we Candace Pert, she talks about the peptides that are found in the body and how acetylcholine has bonding sites in different aspects of the body. And if you have an emotional charge, so a negative charge, an ion that's a negative charge stuck in an area, it might be keeping those chemistries from actually getting in and helping the body. But if you go in and you release the emotional aspect, then all of a sudden the chemistry can start binding with that particular site. And that's how I see it, or that's how I interpret it. And what happens is you're working with Dr. J. Dunn
Mm-hmm.
and you're doing the methylation.
Mm-hmm.
I started training with her because my clients would get to a plateau of emotions and patterns they couldn't get past. And as soon as I started getting their methylization and their chemistry working, then all of a sudden, all the emotions that were stuck there started surfacing. And what I found is I would do a protocol, and 2 weeks later, I said, this is going to last for about 2 weeks, and then you're going to need to call me almost to the day. They'll call me and they'll go, okay, none of it feels good. And that's because an emotion was coming up, a pattern was coming up. And when we processed that emotion out, what happened is their chemistry opened back up and the protocol would work again. Whereas if you went to somebody who wasn't processing the emotions, you would start to try different supplements to try and break through that. It might break through it for them, or it might just make it worse. And the person goes, I can't do this anymore. My emotions are just too, it's just too much. So it all works hand in hand. And this is why it's so important to look at the emotional component of a person. You want to get rid of those negative charges or whatever that charge is that's blocking the chemistry from flowing through that area and utilizing that part of your body correctly.
So I'd like to, not to make this too personal, but I'd like to drill down on that for a second, because you mentioned, I didn't even realize I touched my neck earlier, but I had daily headaches for years, actually decades. And I eventually went to a headache clinic in when I lived in Raleigh, North Carolina. And this doctor, went through all my history and that kind of thing. And he concluded that I had occipital neuralgia, which meant that in this side of my neck, there's a the way he described it, there's a nerve that never stops firing, that creates tension in my neck, that was creating the headaches. And so the solutions for that were steroid injections, or numbing, injections like anesthesia, almost like anesthesia, or Botox. Um, None of which I did, because I didn't want to put any of that stuff in my body. But so let's stay on that for a second. So would you take another direction with that? I mean,
If I can share, the first, when you brought that up, I got the word mom and I got pain in the neck. So just think, and you don't have to share that with our audience, but just think how you might have interpreted growing up your mom being a pain in the neck or somebody telling you that. something you couldn't process could be there.
Hmm.
And so if you put your hand back out there and you think about mom and you think about pain in the neck, it might come to you and all of a sudden you might feel a release in that area.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes it's the first word is mom tried to help versus mom was the problem. Something was a pain in the neck, but mom's associated somehow. So we don't ever make the first word what is the target. We try to I try to interact with the person to determine what's stuck there, at least on the emotional component part.
Wow, that's fascinating. Oh, my mom was a very feisty Irish woman, and she was a pain in the neck to a lot of people. So, on purpose, and she loved it. Anyway, so that's really really interesting. So going back to
And
you were talking.
can
Pardon me?
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Whenever you hit on something and you acknowledge it, your body wants to release it. And what I get is the emotion of sadness. And sadness is your body, the Gestalt brain saying, can we let this go? And you'll feel feelings come up like you want to cry or it's sad. And so if you close your eyes and you just let those feelings go out the top of your head and preferably out of the building you're in, what you're doing is you're letting those charges out of your body. So whenever you're sad, your body is celebrating and asking you, can we let go of this? But we've been taught that sadness is so wrong, that you shouldn't cry, don't cry, don't cry. And it's actually the opposite. The lungs is the organ that does sadness and actually processes emotions. And when you breathe, this is why a lot of times when you're emotional, people go breathe. You start to breathe, and all of a
Mhm.
sudden things are moving, and you're starting to feel better because you're actually processing the emotions. But emotions come up, and the large intestine is paired with the lungs, and the crap goes down. So this is why there's two different directions. So in emotions, when you get sad, you need to stop, honor the sadness, let it come up and out of your body.
It's really funny that I was listening to what you were just saying. My mom, she was a tough. I mean, I'm the youngest of six boys. She was tough on everybody her whole life. Not that she was never abusive or anything, but she was just a tough person. And she drifted into dementia and eventually passed away at the age of 93 after struggling a bunch of years with that. But during the course of that, I remember one day I was out running, and by this time my mother, it was completely helpless. She was bedridden. She was deep into dementia, and she was powerless, basically. And I remember, I can remember it as clear as day. I was out running, and that sense just hit me, and there was this major like release, and any tension or any anger or anything, or what I did or didn't get from my mom, just flew away, because there was, you know, and I suspect that's kind of related to what you were just talking about.
Yes. And because you were running, you were breathing and things were coming up for you. Movement, changing your chemistry through supplementation, supporting your body physically, chemically, emotionally, makes all of this work. And so that they start to work in harmony. Your body, here's what I think about the two hemispheres. I'm gonna switch just for a second. The left brain we think is the get all. It has all the information, it tells us what to do. But the Gestalt brain is more deadly. It'll kill you to get a point across because the Gestalt brain helps your body become a physical representation of the way you are thinking, not what you're thinking, but the way you think about something. Shoulders are tight. I'm responsible. I carry a lot of responsibility. And so if you take your shoulders that are tight and you feel responsible that you're lugging the world on your shoulders, your body's just going to become tight because it perceives it. And through the Gestalt brain, if it perceives it, it's a reality.
Mm.
And it acts on that reality and changes the body to become in harmony with that reality. Your job is always looking for harmony. It doesn't care if it's positive or negative or it'll kill you. It's looking for your negative in thought. I'm going to make a negative attitude in your body. I'm going to put something that matches that. And this is why your belief systems, your mindset, your emotions need to be processed and looked at and maybe revamped, because you want the physical body to be that reflection of the positive part of you, not the negative, not the part you're in most.
So when you're engaging with a client, is this kind of the process that you go down through with them? Or are you like doing some discovery with them, investigating, kind of understanding their history of emotions and that kind of thing, and trying to derive that into some solution for their current health issues? Yeah.
Health issues or just relationship issues. I recently had a client who came to me, and his is business aspects. And so he was talking about a presentation he was going to give. I says, well, do go into it a little bit. And he totally went into his logical brain and he just started talking and da 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 da. I said, when you don't use the whole brain to communicate and you just talk from here, you're not monotone, but there's nothing for to occupy the gestalt brain because there's no information coming like I'm doing to you right now. And so your brain starts to wander and you stop listening. I said, but if you use your body and you talk with all of it, then you capture that person. Even if they don't think they hear you, you get in. It's subliminal. And it's amazing how emotions, good or bad, can incite others into an action of any sort, good or bad. So when you talk from the body, you talk with what you want to say, but you slow it down, you use your energy, then you capture your audience better. So even in a business aspect, I do a lot of business coaching with people to find out what they're doing that they can improve to get more out of what they want to achieve. So it goes across the board, really.
That's really fascinating. So let's, you mentioned Dr. Dunn. So let's use kind of her as an example. But you know, one of the great things about what we created with the Practice Experts Collaborative is we've got practitioners of different kinds across literally every discipline of healthcare, addressing most of the major complex diseases and chronic illnesses. You know, you name it, there's somebody in our collaborative who's got a specialty in that. And they're, what I love about it is that they're you can see them working within their discipline on a specialty area. And then when we step back and have conversations like this, and often they're, these folks are not stuck to their specialty, so they tend to be more open-minded. This we're operating in the field of holistic healthcare, which you know, I tend to think that's functional integrative lifestyle, you know, medicine are the specific disciplines that people are trained in that area. But it's about the kinds of things that you're talking about. It's about searching for root causes, and Dr. Dunn's a great example, but there are lots of examples of people who are working in, you know, musculoskeletal work, or they're working in, cranial, you know, therapies, or they're working in some other aspect of the body's chemistry, or maybe maybe their specialty is gut health or the gut brain connection. So how should those folks think about connecting and collaborating with you and utilizing your skills to enhance what they're doing? And since you've worked so closely with Dr. Dunn, perhaps that's a great example.
Well, let's just even take Dr. Norm Julie. Dr. Norm Shealy will have a client where he can only take them so far, and he's realizing there's an emotional component. So then
So Dr. Shealy, so give us some context. So what kind of doctor is he?
Dr. Norm Shealy is a holistic doctor. He's one of the front runners of the holistic movement, and he is well known. He has lots of books out. Carolyn Mays, have you heard of Carolyn Mays?
Mhm.
He and her paired together for a long time. So
Okay.
he was a neurosurgeon. He's done. He did this TENS unit. He has a lot
Hmm.
of devices and stuff. And so I've worked with him in that if he has a patient of his who just can't get any better, then what he often does is have me come in or an intuitive come in and find the root cause of that and help that person get past that. And it really does make a difference because once you understand the emotional aspect, if that's your specialty or whatever your specialty is, you can get to that root, you can help release it. That's great. There are some intuitives who just give the information but don't give you tools on how to process. Like when somebody goes, you just got to process that emotion. How are emotions processed? And we covered that already. They are covered through the lungs by breathing them up and out of the body. They're not they're not processed by pushing them down with a sense of pressure, because that sense of pressure, again, the gestalt brain's going to feel it, and then it's going to apply that verbiage, if we say it that way, to the body and keep pressure of pushing something down. You put pressure on something, it'll affect that organ system, such as intestinal tract. You don't breathe, you don't eliminate. It's amazing how that happens. So it's all
Well,
paired.
and they also don't get resolved by taking painkillers or or taking other medications to be masking the symptoms that unfortunately tends to be the path of a lot of allopathic doctors. Come in and say, hey, I'm stressed. Okay, let's give you something to reduce that stress. But that's not, to your point, that's not getting to the cause, and it's not ultimately going to solve the problem.
Right.
It's just masking it or maybe creating an addiction. Um,
So that I want to work with people who understand what I can do for them, and they pass the client to me and I pass it back.
hmm,
I don't want client, I'm not codependent with people. In fact, I try to give you tools. If you come to me, I expect you to at least go through your toolbox, the ones I've taught you, and try yourself, because the codependency just doesn't work for me at all.
yeah.
I'm also looking in this collaborative, and this is the reason why I'm here for you to look through and find referrals from my clients. I get
Hmm.
them all over from the United States. I have one gal in Alabama right now, and she's looking for a functional medicine doctor. And because she's stuck with, has a lot of people she's talking to, but she wants somebody that it can funnel through.
Hmm.
And so I'm looking for, when a person comes to me and I know they need somebody outside of my skill set, I want a pool of people I can get to know and have a relationship with, or watch the video and say, oh, yeah, this would be a good fit for so and be able to refer back to them, because I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what a lot of people, patients and and practitioners are coming to recognize is that no single person has the answer. And most of us grew up, in an era where we had a primary care physician, and that physician was our air traffic controller, so to speak. You come to him or her with a problem, and they say, okay, they'll either prescribe something to address that problem, or maybe refer you to a specialist. And I my own observation is we've transitioned out of that, or need to. And the question becomes, all right, who is that central air traffic controller now? Um,
I
and
think the insurance companies are the controller right unfortunately.
Well, yeah, yeah, in the conventional allopathic medicine space, but if you know if we're in the holistic healthcare space, which more and more tends to be cash pay or subscriptions or membership models or that kind of thing, you know, it seems to me that the transition is that I'm the air traffic controller on my health, and I'm bringing in the people who can, you know, best work with me. And to the extent that you're working, collaborating with folks like Dr. Dunn or Dr. Shealy or whatever, that to me is a beautiful model, because you're looking at the whole person, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and addressing it from a bunch of different angles. I'll give you a quick story. I was working with a naturopathic doctor up in Minnesota who we were talking about some of the unique cases he had. And he said this one woman had been to a dozen or more doctors for years, and nobody was addressing her issues. And they were, you know, gotten to the point where saying there's nothing physically wrong with you, it's all in your head, kind of thing. And he spent some time with her, and in the course of those discussions learned that her husband and her two boys had died after very tragic diseases. And she had all of the paperwork about their years of care down in her basement. And he somehow came to I mean, after trying everything himself as well, he said, take all those papers and burn them.
Hmm.
Just get rid of it. And lo and behold, she followed his advice. She took all the papers and burned them, got rid of them, and her health issues disappeared.
Right. And again, that Gestalt brain saying, okay, we're connected to this energy. So if you get rid of it, then I can release it out of the body
Right.
because you don't have to feel it anymore. You're not connected with it. And then the health does change. So yes, it's amazing what can happen. Um, you know, again, the collaborative is so important to me because I can't order tests or I can't order blood work or I can't do these things. So for my clients, I need somebody who they can go in and talk to and say, can you do this for me? And do you understand why I'm doing this? And that's why I brought the allopathic doctor situation in, because even my doctor, they're clueless of what my needs are, or what I'm trying to do. So I use them where I have to because I can't order certain tests and stuff. But then I come back into this world. But I'm looking for people who are more of that like mind, who do understand, who can assist my clients. So mine are clients and yours might, or the doctors might be patients, but my clients need that doctor who can support what we're doing.
Yeah, yeah,
Got
absolutely.
that collaborative aspect to it.
Well, tell you what, Barbara, this has really been fantastic. So, you know, perhaps to kind of summarize in terms of next steps or whatever. So, if there's a practitioner out in the collaborative, how should they know how to engage with you, when to bring you in? Is it early in the process with their patients or their clients, or is it mid? Or, I mean, how do you find that that typically works best?
If an individual is very stuck and doesn't know, they can almost get to the root, but they keep missing the mark, then calling me, and even without me talking to the client themselves, if they want me to just give them an impression of somebody, what I believe might be the route to get them going down the road again, that that's the first level you might want to even try. I have this person, their first name is X, and um, this is where what I see, this a little bit of history, and then from that I can intuit some information that probably has some validity to it. Again, it's subjective. Um, so it'll depend on how the person I'm working with, how they see it, or whether they can utilize that information. If they then feel comfortable with getting to know me and the information I can give them, they might start referring a client here or there. Go work with Barb, find out what the root, come back. So
Yep.
I'm not going to. I'm really good at passing people back. I respect they're your client. I have my specialty, and I want you to go out and be able to work with a bunch of people until that client is their fullest potential, however that looks.
Yeah. Great, great. So what's the best way to get in contact with you? Your website, email, phone? I mean, what's your best preference for how people reach out to you?
The best way is just to email me directly at barb@intuitive-coaching.com.
Okay,
And my website is intuitive-coaching.com.
wonderful.
But just email me and I'll be glad to answer any questions or get on the phone with you and just give you some insights of what I perceive. So,
Okay. Well, perhaps I'll reach out to you and find out what this pain in my neck is all about, whether it actually is my mother or not. Well, thank you again for your time. I really, really appreciate it. I'm sure everyone's going to get a lot out of this video.
I I enjoyed it very much, and I thank you, Richard, for doing this interview with me. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. Talk to you soon.
Uh, Bye.